Mogadishu, October 13, 1977. A GSG-9 assault team storms a hijacked Lufthansa aircraft on the runway. 86 hostages, 4 hijackers. The operation lasts 11 minutes. 3 hijackers dead, 1 captured. Every hostage alive. The weapon GSG-9 carried that night was the MP5, a submachine gun designed in the early 1960s by a West German company that had originally been building sewing machines. It would go on to define counterterrorism for the next 40 years. And Heckler Koch, the company that built it, spent a decade and a half trying to kill it. They failed. Not because the replacement was bad. The replacement was cheaper, lighter, more modular, and chambered in calibers the MP5 could never offer. It failed because H&K had created something they could not uncreate. And understanding what that was explains something that goes far beyond firearms. The MP5 entered service with the West German border guard in 1966. That is not a remarkable fact on its own. Dozens of submachine guns entered service somewhere in 1966. What happened next was, within a decade, the SAS had adopted it. After joint training with GSG-9 following the Mogadishu operation, LAPD SWAT standardized on it. The FBI followed. By 1980, the MP5 had become the weapon of the Iranian Embassy siege. The moment an entire generation of police commanders watched 6 SAS men clear a building on live television. The platform spread the way doctrine spreads, unit by unit, each adoption validating the last. And the reason it held was mechanical. The MP5's roller-delayed blowback system works like this. As the cartridge fires, 2 steel rollers lock the bolt carrier against the receiver until chamber pressure drops to a safe level. Only then does the bolt travel rearward. The result is a firing impulse that is smoother, more controlled, and more accurate over distance than any simple blowback design chambered in the same round. Operators who trained on it understood this in their hands before they understood it in any armory brief. They knew exactly how it moved. That knowledge was embedded in their trigger pull, their muzzle discipline, their target transitions under stress. By the mid-1990s, the MP5 was not just a weapon. It was the answer to a question thousands of operators had already stopped asking. What do we carry when we go through that door? Then, H&K came to them with a new answer. To understand the UMP, you have to understand what Heckler Koch was in 1995, a company in serious trouble. Their most ambitious project, the G11, a caseless ammunition rifle that was supposed to be the future of infantry weapons, had consumed years of development and hundreds of millions in funding. German reunification killed the procurement. The G11 never entered service. Then British Aerospace acquired H&K in 1991. New ownership, new priorities, cost-cutting and restructuring across every product line. And at the same time, their most important customer, the United States, was sending a clear signal. American law enforcement, wedded to the .40S and W and .45A CP rounds, kept asking the same question: why is there no MP5 in a larger caliber? H&K had tried to answer it. The MP5/10 in 10mm auto, built for the FBI. The MP5/40 in .40S and W. Both were awkward adaptations of a mechanism not designed for those cartridges. The FBI were virtually the only buyers. The MP5 itself was hemorrhaging money. Stamped sheet steel, roller components requiring skilled machining. H&K was reportedly losing money on every unit shipped, at a list price of $1,500 per gun. The solution they designed was rational: a polymer receiver. Simple blowback operation. Modular caliber system. .45 ACP for the American market, .40S and W, and 9mm. Fewer parts, less manufacturing time. Launch price in 1999. $850 per unit, 40% cheaper than the MP5 it was replacing. They called it the UMP, Universal Machine Pistol. It was a sound business decision. It was a reasonable engineering solution. And it ran into a problem no business decision or engineering solution could have anticipated. The first problem was the mechanism. Simple blowback holds the bolt closed with spring pressure and mass alone. To handle the higher pressures of 0.45 ACP, H and K, had to reduce the cyclic rate to 600 rounds per minute, making the UMP 45 one of the slowest firing submachine guns in service. The felt recoil was harder than the MP5, not dramatically, but operators who had internalized the MP5's mechanical dampening over thousands of rounds noticed immediately. Accuracy at 25 to 50 meters, the distances that mattered in CQB, was measurably inferior. For units whose entire doctrine was built around the MP5's precision in tight spaces, that gap was not acceptable. But the mechanism alone would not have killed the UMP's mission. What killed it was when it arrived. The late 1990s were not 1977. The threat picture had changed. Body armor was now standard on serious adversaries, and 9mm, .40 S&W and .45 ACP could not reliably defeat it. Agencies already questioning whether to keep a submachine gun at all were not going to replace their MP5 with a cheaper one. They were moving to the M4 carbine in 5.56mm, or waiting for the MP7 H&K's own 4.6 by 30mm armor-defeating platform, which, with bitter irony, H&K were developing at the same time they were selling the UMP. The UMP arrived at the precise moment the market stopped wanting what it was offering. And then, 1 year into production, came the recall. In 2000, H&K recalled UMP and USC serial numbers across multiple batches. The polymer operating handles were failing under use, snapping off, rendering the weapons inoperable. For a weapon positioned as the modern, reliable successor to the MP5, the timing was as bad as it could have been. The French National Police had been in active discussion with H&K about a 40,000 unit order. They withdrew. H&K manufactured MP5s for them instead. Each of these three failures, physics, timing, the recall, was recoverable in isolation. Together, they ensured the UMP would never do what it was built to do. Tier 1 units kept the MP5. The UMP found a different market, CBP, second-tier special forces across a dozen countries, units without the training depth or institutional history to make the comparison matter. It was not a failure as a weapon, it was a failure as a replacement. And that distinction is where the real story begins. H&K's engineers had designed the UMP to fix every known problem with the MP5. They had addressed the cost, the caliber limitation, the missing bolt catch, the polymer degradation risk. They had not designed around this. By 1999, the MP5 had been present at the Iranian Embassy siege, at Mogadishu, at operations that never made any public record across 3 decades and every inhabited continent. The operators who carried it had not simply used it. They had used it in the moments that defined their unit's identity. That history had done something to the weapon that no specification could capture or competitor could inherit. It had made the MP5 the physical embodiment of a standard. Every armorer in every unit that carried it knew its parts without looking. Every instructor had built training around its impulse. Every commander had issued it on the assumption that the operator receiving it had already run thousands of rounds through an identical platform. That is not sentiment. It is operational infrastructure. And operational infrastructure does not get replaced by a cheaper receiver and a bolt catch. H&K eventually understood this, because the market told them. They did not discontinue the MP5. They modernized it. Picatinny rails, updated trigger groups. In 2015, at AUSA, an exhibition for next-generation weapons. They unveil mid-life upgrade kits for the MP5, a weapon designed in 1964, receiving factory investment in 2015, because the demand was still there. The UMP had been built to make that investment unnecessary. Instead, the MP5's survival made the UMP's failure complete. The UMP is still in production, still in service. It is carried by US Customs and Border Protection, by Special Forces units across a dozen countries. The UMP-9, the 9mm variant, outsells the .45 and .40 caliber versions and holds a legitimate place in the market. This is not the story of a bad weapon. It is the story of what happens when a weapon is asked to replace something that has become more than a weapon. The lesson applies well beyond firearms procurement. In any domain where a tool, a platform, a system, a process has been used by serious people in high-stakes conditions over a long period of time, it accumulates something that cannot be transferred by specification comparison. Call it institutional weight. The accumulated knowledge of every operator who ran it, every armorer who maintained it, every commander who trusted it in the worst possible circumstances. That weight is invisible on a cost per unit sheet. It does not appear in a capability review, and it's the most powerful force in any procurement decision involving a platform with real operational history. H&K built a better gun on paper. The operators it needed to convince were not reading the paper.